My parents own a small shop in our town. The shop isn't anything special, just selling regular groceries and products from local businesses. They had been running it for over 20 years, and my dad took it very seriously, often keeping the store open until midnight and sometimes even staying later. When I turned 16, I started helping out a few hours a week. When I turned 18, I started working full-time while taking online college courses. That night was my dad's day off, and my mom was having some health issues, so I was the one closing the store. The store usually wasn't very busy during the last few hours of the night, and there wasn't much to restock either. Around 9 p.m., almost no customers were coming in. I think only 1 or 2 people came in, so I grabbed a sandwich from the fridge and took a quick lunch break. Of course, right when I did, someone walked in. I made my way back to the front desk and put the sandwich aside, waiting for the customer to finish shopping. I pulled out my phone, and after a couple of minutes, I looked up to see how the customer was doing, but I didn't see him. I scanned the room again, but still didn't see him anywhere. Thinking he was maybe in a corner I couldn't see, I waited a few more minutes, but he never appeared. I didn't hear him either. Feeling uneasy, I walked around the counter and started looking through the aisles. It didn't take long to find him in the second aisle. A man was crouched down at the end, staring at the floor and not making a sound. "Sir?" I called out. The man immediately looked up at me, then stood up and continued to stare at me. All I could focus on were his eyes. They were wide and full, in a slightly unsettling way. After a couple of seconds, he quickly walked away and out of the store without saying a word. Once I saw him leave, my first reaction was to check where he had been crouching to see if there was any reason for it. But there wasn't. I mean, he had just been crouching in the aisle the whole time. It kind of freaked me out because it was so odd. I went up to the front door and checked that he had fully left the area. Obviously, it was dark outside, but I didn't see him anywhere. I then went back to the counter and stayed a little more alert. 3 hours passed, and not a single customer came in. It was now time to close up, and after so much time had passed, I wasn't thinking about that man anymore. I was just ready to go home. I walked up to the front and locked the door, then grabbed my bag and started walking toward the back door to leave. Suddenly, an extremely loud bang echoed through the store. I froze in place, knowing it had to have come from somewhere in the back. It was so loud that I had no idea what it could have been. Worried, I slowly walked to the corner and looked down the back hallway. At the far end, dust was scattering through the air, and the metal back door was slightly open. Standing in the hallway was the same man from earlier. He was staring at me with the same wide-open eyes. I didn't know what to say or do. It was like I was frozen in that moment. Despite his clear determination to break in, he didn't look angry. He had no emotion at all. I took a few slow steps back, then ran for the front door, leaving the store and running across the street while calling 911. I also called my dad, who rushed over to make sure I was okay. The man had already left when the police arrived, but he had left behind a sledgehammer lying on the pavement behind the door. At first glance, nothing seemed to be missing or stolen, so his intentions are anyone's guess. It's clear he was unstable, which means he could have been planning anything. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out what that was. I'm a warehouse worker for a small business in my city. I'd been in and out of jobs for a while, so this wasn't really a career or anything. I just did what I had to do every night, and that was it. Specifically, I had to unload pallets of shipments that came in and put everything in its designated place in the warehouse. It was a super simple job, and most of the time, I just put in earbuds and listened to music while I worked. The warehouse wasn't too big, so very rarely would there be another person working overnight with me. That would only happen during the holidays. But this night was just a regular night. I came in, counted the stock, then put my headphones in and started unloading the boxes from the shipments. I started at 10 o'clock, and it was probably between 12 and 1 a.m. when a knock echoed through the building. I took my headphones out and listened but didn't hear it anymore. The building was old and would creak and groan throughout the night, especially when it was windy outside. But what I thought I heard was clearly someone knocking. I walked to the back of the building and looked around, then went to the front. I didn't see anything inside, so I opened the front door and looked outside. The parking lot was empty, and the night was still and quiet. I shut and locked the door, then went back to work, thinking I must have just misheard it. Being more cautious, though, I left my headphones out for a bit. About 20 minutes later, I heard something again. This wasn't a knock, though. It was more of a single thump coming from the front. I hurried down the hallway and up to the front portion of the warehouse. Nothing was there. No signs of anything wrong or anyone at the door. I knew what I heard this time, though, which made me kind of nervous. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment and just looked around, silently listening and looking for something, anything, that could be the cause of these noises. Standing there, I got a bad gut feeling, just that something wasn't right. I walked up to the front door and leaned on it to look out at the parking lot again. But as I put my weight on the door, it swung open with ease. I stumbled forward, not expecting it. It was almost as if the door wasn't locked or even latched at all, yet I had checked and locked it not even half an hour ago. I looked at the door, then saw the latch lying broken on the ground in front of me. My stomach tightened, and I felt my adrenaline suddenly spike. Not even a second later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps echoing from the dim hallway behind me. I quickly went out the door and into the parking lot, still in a dazed and unsure state. Once I was a good distance from the door, I turned around. Barely visible through the glass door, the shape of a figure walked up to the other side. They moved around for a moment, definitely looking at me, then they walked away. I called the cops as soon as I could and waited in the parking lot, but I never saw any more movement in the building. When they arrived, they found that the person had left through the back door, and it seems like they couldn't figure out anything else to help solve the case. A few things showed up missing, but nothing substantial, and honestly, I think it was probably just from a wrong stock count. Regardless of whether anything was stolen, to break the latch, they must have had some kind of tool or weapon, which only makes the whole thing scarier. They also moved the door back to look like it was closed, knowing it would keep me from figuring out what was going on. Maybe if I hadn't noticed the door was broken, I would have come face to face with whoever that person was, and I have no way of knowing how that would have turned out. Although unlikely, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was coming after me for some reason. So I've since left that job and moved on, hoping I don't run into him again. I'm a receptionist at a popular hotel chain in the US. For the better part of a year, I'd been working overnights. This night, I was doing my usual shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. It was pouring outside, so I wasn't expecting any walk-ins, and the schedule didn't show any bookings starting that night. On nights like these, my job is to just stay awake and take phone calls or help current customers with any room services or checkouts. We had a coffee machine in the hotel lobby, so I had a cup of coffee next to me as I tried to stay awake. Even after having worked overnights for a while, I still had trouble staying awake during my shifts, and the rain outside made me even more tired. At around 1 a.m., a phone call came in. I answered, and before I could even speak, a man quickly asked if we were still accepting walk-ins. His voice was very muffled, and there was a really loud background sound. "Yeah, we have rooms available for walk-ins tonight," I said. He responded, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. As I asked if he could repeat himself, I looked up from the desk and saw a small light glowing outside. It was from a phone, as someone was holding it up to their ear, standing almost right up against the front window in the pouring rain. Knowing it had to be the man I was talking to, I was about to wave to him, but something about this made me feel uneasy, so I decided to pretend like I didn't see him. A moment later, though, he ended the phone call. I saw the light turn off outside and the outline of the man moving toward the entrance. The doors opened, and the man walked through the hotel lobby, dragging water across the floor. He came up to the counter and bluntly asked for a room. He was fully soaked, with water dripping from his hair, yet his face showed nothing but exhaustion. I don't know if I'd ever seen someone look so sleep-deprived. I said okay and found him a room, then asked how he'd like to pay for it. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a debit card, then handed it to me. I swiped it, but it declined. I looked up at him, only to see that he was staring at me. It didn't go through. Do you have another card to try?" The man didn't respond, holding his stare and not moving aside from a few blinks. As the seconds kept ticking by without any reaction, I grew more and more uneasy. I looked down and put the card on the desk, sliding it back to him, but he didn't even look at it. Instead, he turned and started walking away from the desk and toward the hallway with the rooms. By now, I knew something wasn't right, so I quickly pressed the button that calls the police, then went out to the hallway where the man was. I found him standing at the door of one of the rooms. He started pounding on it, yelling in a harsh voice for them to open the door. I tried telling him to stop, but I didn't want to get too close, not knowing if he was in some kind of dangerous state. Then, he pulled a small knife from his pocket and started trying to pry the door open. I yelled at him to stop and told him that the police were on their way. The man paused for a second and shot an awful glance at me, then turned to face me and screamed at me to open the door for him as he started walking down the hallway. I was terrified and just ran right out of the hotel and into the parking lot. Through the window, I could see him go back to the same door and continue pounding on it. The police arrived quickly, making it inside before the man could get into the room. Somehow, they got him to drop the knife and locked him up in their car. The person that was in the room came out. It was a kind young lady, visibly shaking and horrified. It turned out the man was an ex of hers that she hadn't seen or talked to in over 10 years. How he got the information on where she was staying and even what room she was in, nobody seems to know. They aren't even sure how long he'd been stalking her, which is really disturbing. But what he would have done had he gotten in is likely even more disturbing.